Hello guys, welcome back. My name is Nathan and today we're going to be talking about the latest NHL trade rumors surrounding Jeff Petry potentially going away from the Montreal Canadiens, a big Carey price update, as well as Conor Garland potentially being traded away from the Vancouver Canucks. There is a lot to talk about and we might as well get into it. So what are the latest NHL trade rumors across the league and what are the latest news that you guys need to know about? Watch till the end for all the trade rumors and all the news and make sure you hit that subscribe button if you are new. 55% of the people that are watching are not subscribed. If you like hockey, this channel is the place to be. Now, the first player I want to talk about today is Jeff Petry of the Montreal Canadiens, who might have had one of the biggest turnarounds we have ever seen with any NHL player. Just last season, he was a huge part of the defense that took the Canadiens onto the Stanley Cup final, playing some spectacular hockey, and around that time as well, having that big contract extension and looking like a core leadership piece for this Canadiens franchise. Then we turn the clock all the way to this season, and with the Shea Weber retirement and all the injuries that's come to this Canadiens team, Jeff Petry has had more of a workload than he ever has, it feels like, and we've seen him desperately be overwhelmed throughout most of this season. So far this year, in 37 games, he has 1 goal, 5 assists for 6 points, is a -7, though I'm kind of surprised it's not even worse than the plus-minus. On paper, though, Jeff Petry has just been overwhelmed, inconsistent, and way less efficient defensively, and I think he's one of the main reasons why the Canadiens have been so bad this year. Although, yes, the injuries are, I think, the biggest reason. Jeff Petry's play this year has been a huge step down from seasons in the past, and his trade value is lowering as we speak. And that is a very huge problem for the Montreal Canadiens because the contract is also not pretty whatsoever. Of course, with that contract extension, Jeff Petry makes $6.25 million for this year and the next 3 years afterwards, which for a 34-year-old defenseman isn't exactly the greatest, especially when you factor in the drastic decline he's had this season. If that continues, I don't think there's going to be a lot of teams begging to have a $6.25 million defenseman on their D-core, even if last season was super successful for him. And to add on top of that, he also has a modified no-move clause. He'll submit 15 teams he could be traded to, which even lessens the pool even more for the Canadiens in the trade market right now. Although I still think Jeff Petry has value, I really don't think we should expect him to get too much, again, if that decline continues to happen this year. Now, for some reason, I completely forgot to even mention why we're talking about Jeff Petry in the first place, and that is because with his poor play and undecided future, we saw a lot of trade rumors surrounding him, and I think one of the biggest ones that came up recently was a report by Francois Gagnon that talked about his situation with the Montreal Canadiens and confirmed that Jeff Petry is looking to potentially be traded either this year or in the offseason, and that was extremely interesting. Now, Kent Hughes, the new GM for the Canadiens, was actually asked about this situation pretty recently, and he said this about Jeff Petry: if we can find an exchange that is good for the club and that is good for Jeff Petry at the same time, yes, all the options are on the table. So it is kind of vague, but at the same time, Kent Hughes does acknowledge that if the right offer does come for this defenseman, then we will likely see a trade. And I do expect that we will see a trade within the next year, but as Elliot Freeman goes on to mention, I really don't see it happening this trade deadline, more so in the offseason for the Canadiens. Now, this tweet actually comes from NHL Watcher, and he paraphrased what Friedman is saying. Friedman on TJMS, the Jeff Merrick show, talking Jeff Petry's trade. I just don't know if it's going to be now or it's going to be in the summer. One of the things I have heard is that it's possible that this doesn't happen until the summer because teams have more flexibility to do it. And then Friedman continues, there will be interest. People saw the way he played last year. So basically, again, summarizing everything we talked about, because of the play last season, there would still be some serious interest there, but again, going back to that cap hit, it's a player that will take a lot to get on and will most likely be an off-season trade. So don't expect a Jeff Petry trade anytime soon, but Ken Hughes will likely use that as one of his first big moves. Trading Jeff Petry at this point, though, seems like an inevitability. But now we're going to move on to yet another Montreal Canadien, this time another player that's been in the news and rumors really over the past couple months in Carey Price. Price. Now, we talked about a lot on this channel being a potential solution to the Oilers' goaltending problem, but we got a lot of answers with Carey Price's recent press conference in the Montreal media. He said a lot and answered a lot, and we got a lot of updates to talk about surrounding his future and present with the Montreal Canadiens. Now, one of the first things he talked about was his time in rehab and how it went, and Carey Price said this: "It was very difficult. I was in a position where I definitely needed to reach out, and it was a trying time for sure. It was one that needed to be made, and ultimately it was successful. Very thankful for the help that I got." And that was really one of my biggest questions going in this press conference, was how Carey Price was doing, how is his mental health, was he doing better? And thankfully, from what Carey Price is saying here, he is doing better, which is the ultimate goal. Carey Price is in a situation where he can retire today and be happy, and I'm thankful that he's happy right now being where he's at. But then Carey Price goes on to say even more things about his situation, and Carey Price said this: "I'm doing well. I know it's been a frustrating time for everyone, and it's been one for me as well. It's been a long year." As well as Price saying on potentially playing this year, "It's definitely an objective for me this season." And in my opinion, one of the biggest quotes I was thinking about when it came to this press conference was this: "You never know. There's always a possibility. There's a lot going on over the next couple weeks that will determine the rest of my season," Price says when asked if there's a chance he won't be able to ever play again. And then we go on to maybe the biggest quote from Carey Price, where he said this: "Me and my family are very happy here in Montreal. We're settled in. This is our home. There's a reason I signed the contract I did here with a no movement clause. As of right now, I have no plans to be anywhere else." So that is a huge update. Obviously, when we were talking about Price going to the Oilers, that no move clause was a huge factor. Would Price want to leave the Montreal Canadiens? But I think we get a pretty definitive answer there that Price would want to stay in Montreal, likely for the rest of his career, which is great news for Habs fans to have Carey Price retiring as a Montreal Canadian. But at the same time, it feels like Price is healthy, he's happy right now, and he's happy staying in Montreal. So I think for right now, we can pretty much turn off the fire on all the trade rumors because Carey Price still wants to be a Canadian. Now, going away from the Montreal Canadiens talk for just a second, there were a ton of trade rumors about really one team specifically over the past couple of days, and that is the Vancouver Canucks. Now, the Canucks are in a weird position since they've been great since Bruce Boudreau has gotten under the helm, but at the same time, they're in the middle of the wild card race and still might not be a team actually in the playoffs this year. They have a lot of players to make decisions about, not even just JT Miller, but Conor, Garland, Yaroslav Halak, Oliver Ekman-Larsson, Brock Boeser was even mentioned a bit over the past couple of days. There are a lot of players that the Canucks could be moving on from. But one of the biggest things that's been reported widely is that the Canucks' number one priority with this new management group is cap space. Being able to have as much cap space as humanly possible is vitally important, and I think that will influence a lot of the deals that Vancouver makes over the next year. Now, I'm going to be paraphrasing a lot of quotes here from Taj, and Taj was talking about Elliot Freeman and his thoughts on the Canucks situation, and he said this: "Elliotte mentioned Canucks are discussing number of forwards with other teams, and later mentioned these are notable players before mentioning Garland. His name wasn't mentioned, but it's probably safe to assume Boeser is one of those players." Now, Elliot Freeman goes on to say, "We know Jim Rutherford isn't shy, and I think he's going to get going on what he's going to do to reshape the Canucks." And then another thing as well that Elliot Freeman mentioned was that he wonders about the Devils with Conor Garland. That was one of the biggest rumors surrounding the Canucks over the past couple of days, was Conor Garland's availability. It seems like the New Jersey Devils will be one of those teams asking for him and wanting that lower term cap that Conor Garland provides, but it's no secret that Garland is going to get a lot because of how much of a solid player he can be when he is on the top of his game, and again, that lower cap bit that a lot of teams really value. Now, another really interesting tweet here came from Taj, where he was looking for a Patrick Johnson article. Patrick Johnson, who works for the Province Sports and has some pretty good sources, he was talking about a potential trade with Conor Garland of the Devils, and he said this: "PJ mentioning Ty Smith as someone who could be coming back in a Garland trade. He was drafted by the Devils during the time Doherty was working there." Now, if you don't know, Rachel Doherty was hired by the Canucks just recently to go into their management and work on analytics. Ty Smith would be an interesting addition for the Canucks, though he's a player that's been, if you ask any Devils fan, horrendous this year. I don't think he's going to be a solution, though, for the Canucks, especially defensively. He's an offensive defenseman at his very best. It's still a good one, but I definitely don't think he's what the Canucks would need. Now, a few more quotes that I thought were extremely interesting. The next one coming from Elliot Freeman on his 32 Thoughts podcast, where he said this: Elliot on the Canucks, I definitely believe job number one is to create some cap room. And that was, again, going back to what we were saying, a lot of reporters have been saying that salary cap is the number one priority. Then Elliot Freeman continues, I do think there's a lot of traction around their forwards, and Jim Rutherford is learning what the market is. I think he's going to have the ability to do some things here. And again, going back to that salary cap situation, trading guys like JT Miller, Conor, Garland, even Brock Boeser, if you're looking at preserving as much salary cap as possible, might make sense. And again, it feels like for the Canucks, there might be a little bit of scorched earth this trade deadline and throughout the offseason. Now, a very interesting quote as well from the 32 Thoughts pod talking about the situation. Jeff Marek proposed this: would it be safe to say then that the Canucks, unless your name is Pettersson, Hughes, or Demko, they're listening, or is that too far? Then Elliot Freeman says this: I don't know if it's too far, but I didn't hear Horvat's name. So, according to Elliot Freeman and Jeff Marek talking to each other, really the four untouchables right now for the Canucks are Elias Pettersson, Hughes, Demko, and Bo Horvat. And that kind of goes in line with what we're thinking with the Canucks, that for a lot of these players, they might be out of Vancouver if the right trade offers come about, especially JT Miller, Boeser, and Garland. Those feel like three guys that could be on their way out, again, if the right offer comes. It does feel like with this Canucks team, they're available and they're comfortable with potentially going in a little bit more of a retooling route, and especially with how young Pettersson, Hughes, and Demko are, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, especially since you have some other younger players like Nils Höglander, like Vasily Podkolzin coming up, but it is a big weakness. That prospect pool for the Canucks is a huge weakness for them right now. There's not that many strong up-and-coming players coming up, and I feel like for the Canucks in this situation, to have the cap space and to be able to kind of revitalize that pool might be one of the biggest priorities for this franchise. And considering how good the 2022 and 2023 drafts are, it isn't exactly the craziest thing in the world to maybe think the Canucks are going in a more rebuilding and retooling route. Now, there was a really interesting quote by Frank Seravalli talking about this situation. He said this: I don't know if a lot of what we're talking about waits until March 21st. Now, if you don't know, the trade deadline date this year is March 21st, and Frank Seravalli is hinting at the fact that we might see a JT Miller, a Conor Garland, even a Brock Boeser trade potentially before the trade deadline happens. But especially JT Miller, I would expect to likely go before the trade deadline. And again, Frank Seravalli alludes to that potential fact. Now, there was also some more stuff coming from Stan Smyl, a big player for the Canucks in their franchise history and also a part of management, and he was talking about situations like JT Miller, and he said this: it's going to be a tough decision moving forward. Went on to say it's part of the business and now the salary cap is a big issue. And then this one's coming from Boost Mode: for us, the salary cap is a big issue and we're going to have to take care of those problems if we want to move forward. So there is the direct quote from Stan Smyl, again, high up in the Canucks management. That's kind of what the Canucks whole crew is thinking right now, that the salary cap is a huge component of their team going forward, and they want to maximize that. Likely, again, trading JT Miller and getting as many picks and prospects back. And again, it goes back to them targeting potentially the 2022 this year and 2023 in the drafts. It would make sense to go after those two draft classes because of how deep and stacked they are at the top as well. And for the Canucks, I don't think it's really that much of a problem, especially with what Jim Benning has left behind. There is some huge salary cap issues that this management will have to face head on. So I think, honestly, it might be the smartest thing for the Canucks to go in this retooling direction while Pettersson, while Hughes, while Demko are still at the age that they're at. It does make sense for them. Even if you are going to trade core pieces like JT Miller, you'd still likely get a lot back, and it would jumpstart that retool that could be complete in just a couple of seasons. And I think for Vancouver, going in that retool and kind of giving up on a couple of years might be exactly what they need to finally build back better. I don't know why I mentioned the Joe Biden quote. You get what I mean. You get what I mean. It does make sense for them on a cap level, and it does make sense with the core they have right now. But those are really the big trade rumors I want to talk about today. Maybe a little bit of a shorter video, but still at the same time, a lot to talk about and a lot to look forward to with this NHL trade deadline. Let me know in the comments down below what you guys think about all the trade rumors today with Jeff Petry, the updates with Carey Price, and the big rumors surrounding the Vancouver Canucks right now. Where do you see these big guys going? What trades do you guys see happening? Let me know all your thoughts. Make sure you subscribe, hit that like button, and hit that notification bell if you haven't already. Share this video with your friends, get it out there, and click on this card for all my trade rumor content right in one playlist. playlist. My name is Nathan. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.